The French Revolution and British reactions. The French Revolution began on July 14, 1789, when a revolutionary mob stormed the Bastille, a medieval castle where royal prisoners were kept, and a symbol of royal power. July 14th is celebrated in France as a kind of Independence Day. The National Constituent Assembly, which had already been meeting, soon abolished feudalism, that means eliminating the power of the aristocracy, and issued the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Based on Enlightenment ideas, especially those of Rousseau, it espoused representative government, equal opportunity, and freedom of speech. Many English men and women were thrilled to see the new ideas put into practice in France. The poet William Wordsworth was lucky enough to actually be in Paris during that time, and in 1805 he recorded his reaction. "O pleasant exercise of hope and joy, for mighty were the auxiliars which then stood upon our side, we who were strong in love. Bliss was it in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven. Oh, times in which the meager, stale, forbidding ways of custom, law, and statute took at once the attraction of a country in romance, when reason seemed the most to assert her rights, when most intent on making of herself a prime enchantress, to assist the work which then was going forward in her name. Not favored spots alone, but the whole earth, the beauty wore of promise, that which sets, as at some moment might not be unfelt among the bowers of paradise itself, the budding rose above the rose full blown. What temper at the prospect did not wake to happiness unthought of? The inert were roused, and lively natures rapt away." Writers such as William Blake, Mary Wollstonecraft, and William Godwin were equally excited by the new possibilities opening up. But not everyone shared their enthusiasm. Edmund Burke, a member of Parliament who had supported the American Revolution, strongly opposed the French Revolution and wrote a pamphlet in 1790, Reflections on the Revolution in France, in which he set out the conservative case against the wholesale transformation that the revolutionaries were aiming at. Essentially, he argued that social arrangements were not just meaningless traditions. They reflected the wisdom of generations of human beings and should not be lightly overturned, even in the name of reason. He also predicted that the revolution would end in bloodshed, which turned out to be right. Mary Wollstonecraft fired back a pamphlet, A Vindication of the Rights of Men, in which she defended the French Revolution. In 1791, the National Assembly finally passed a constitution, known as the First Constitution. France is currently on its fifth constitution. It was relatively moderate, establishing a constitutional monarchy in which the king retained some powers, and they held elections for a legislative assembly. But this constitution did not satisfy the more radical revolutionaries. It also didn't satisfy Mary Wollstonecraft, though for different reasons. The ideals of the Enlightenment, which insisted on human equality and rationality, clearly supported the rights of women to education, citizenship, and political participation, though not all Enlightenment figures, to be fair, followed their reasoning to its logical conclusions. But the French National Assembly clearly intended for women to retain their second-class status in the new regime. When they were considering a system of public education, Talleyrand, one of the revolutionary leaders, argued that women didn't need to participate because they were only going to be mothers and wives. Wollstonecraft responded with a pamphlet, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, in which she argues on Enlightenment principles for women's equal education. It has become a classic feminist text, and it's one of your readings for this week. In 1792, however, as Burke had predicted, the revolution turned violent. The Legislative Assembly decided to declare war on Austria and Prussia, partly because they suspected those countries of harboring counter-revolutionaries, but partly because they dreamed of exporting the revolution throughout France and beyond France, throughout Europe, replacing monarchies with republics. This began the Revolutionary Wars, which lasted for many years, and which pitted revolutionary France against most of the rest of Europe. The British were drawn in when the French declared war on Britain in February of 1793. Now, while these wars were just beginning in 1792, the extreme revolutionaries, also known as the Jacobins, stormed the royal residence and arrested the king. They also massacred people suspected of counter-revolutionary tendencies. They replaced the Legislative Assembly with a National Convention, which abolished the monarchy, declared a French republic, and put the king on trial. At the beginning of 1793, they executed King Louis XVI. His queen, Marie Antoinette, was guillotined 9 months later. In 1793, France also saw the bloody Reign of Terror, in which thousands of aristocrats and insufficiently radical revolutionaries were guillotined. Now, for many in England, this turn of events changed their minds about the French Revolution. Their interest and support turned to repulsion and fear. Even Wordsworth began to retreat from his early support of the revolution, though William Blake, another poet, was unfazed by the violence. Other English radicals, such as Godwin and Wollstonecraft, found themselves facing widespread opposition from Englishmen and women terrified of the invasion of French troops and also of the possibility that a similar bloody revolution could occur in their own country. Over the next years, the French Republic degenerated, depending increasingly on military power to maintain control, and in 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte, a powerful general, declared himself first Consul of France, effectively hijacking the representative government. He brought the French Revolution then in 1799 to an end. In 1804, he made the return to monarchy explicit by declaring himself, in fact, crowning himself, Emperor of the French. But the wars in Europe did not come to an end, though they're called from that point on the Napoleonic Wars instead of the Revolutionary Wars. Only in 1815 was Napoleon finally defeated and sent into permanent exile. The French Revolution had profound effects in Britain. It created a conservative reaction in which people rejected the French Revolution, but also almost any idea associated with the revolution and with its supporters in Britain. So while in the 18th century, women's roles in society had been expanding and women's voices had been allowed to participate in public discourse, now the cause of women's rights was associated with radicalism and revolution, and women's rights suffered a serious setback. People, again, wanted women at home, upholding moral standards and teaching the young. Also, in reaction to the atheism associated with the French Revolution, Britain turned back to religion and to the established church, the Anglican Church, partly as bulwarks against the kind of chaos they saw happening in France. The Victorian period, for all its anxieties and doubts, would turn out to be one of the most religious periods in British history. And finally, the rigors of wartime and the fear of revolution led Parliament to limit civil rights. So ironically, the radicalism of France led to conservatism in England, and fear of revolution continued to haunt British society for much of the next century.